Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how you doing? Well, what we're going to be talking about right now is part two of Mockingbird, okay? And where we left off was me saying that we were going to explore the media ties in a specific post 1963 era, okay? Now, focusing on the period from the mid 1960s through the 1970s is a time of significant evolution in this relationship, and it was shaped by the Cold War tensions, domestic upheaval, and eventual public exposure. And this era follows Project Mockingbird in 1963 and precedes the moral speculative of Operation Mockingbird narrative, offering a concrete window into documented interactions. Now, I'm going to stop right there for just a moment because I want you to be able to do your own research and form your own opinions, okay? Especially when I do deep dives into these type of subjects, okay? And if you're new here, hi, how are you? My name is Autumn, and on this channel, I do current events and I do deep dives into like rabbit holes and stuff like that. And a lot of you guys send me things that you are interested in. And this is actually one of the subjects that a community member wanted me to do a deep dive into. So I upload twice a day. And, you know, I try to do as much research as I possibly can to make sure that I get every fact out to you as much as I possibly can in a timely manner. If you're returning, how you doing? Okay, yes, I am of Italian descent and I am from South Jersey. So sometimes my South Jersey accent comes through, and yes, sometimes I mispronounce things because my accent gets in the way. So please just bear with me, okay? So moving on. After Project Mockingbird, the CIA's 1963 wiretapping of journalists Robert Allen and Paul Scott, the agency's interest in media did not wane. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 and Kennedy's assassination in 1963 heightened the national security paranoia, while Vietnam, right, and the domestic unrest fueled leaks and skepticism as well. Now, the CIA, they tasked with countering Soviet influence. They saw the media as a vital tool, even as its methods faced growing scrutiny. Now, the 1975 through 1976 Church Committee investigation into CIA activities revealed that by the mid 1960s, the agency maintained covert ties with about 50 American journalists. And these ranged from stringers to prominent columnists, often providing intelligence or planting stories. A 1965 declassified memo that was noted later in the FOIA releases shows that Ray S. Klein, who was the then Deputy Director of Intelligence, briefing journalists regularly, including from outlets like the Washington Post and also the New York Times. Now, Carl Bernstein's 1977 Rolling Stones article detailed how in 1965 and also in 1966, the Newsweek stringer in the Far East doubled as a CIA contract employee, earning about $10,000 annually, which is about $90,000 today. This was not isolated, and some Newsweek's correspondents maintained such ties into the 1970s. Now, the Mighty Wurlitzer, which is Frank Wisner's term for the CIA's propaganda network, persisted post 1963. And outlets like The Time, CBS News, the New York Times were prized for their credibility, amplifying CIA narratives, like the anti communist framing of Vietnam without direct editorial control. The agency often used intermediaries or foundations to fund publications or guarantee book sales. From 1964 onward, the CIA backed Prager publishers, which released 20 to 25 books of interest to the agency, such as Suzanne Labin's The Ant Hill, and that was on China, and Gunther Nolau's, and that's Nollau, work on the Soviet Union. And the CIA reimbursed cost or ensured distribution, subtly shaping public discourse. So the CIA, they fed stories to journalists to counter anti-war sentiment. A 1967 dispatch instructed field stations to use propaganda assets to refute the Warren Commission critics, showing how media ties extended to domestic narratives. CBS and Time ran pieces aligning with CIA views on Vietnam escalation, often sourced from anonymous officials. So the 1967 bombshell, which is Ramparts magazine, exposed CIA funding of the National Student Association, or NSA, a front group tied to media outreach. This sparked wider inquiries into agency influence, including its media connections, and the fallout pressured outlets to distance themselves through covert ties that lingered. Now, the New York Times and the Washington Post ran follow ups, but their own past ties, like the Post stringers as CIA employees, they remained murky. Executives claimed ignorance, yet the damage fueled public distrust. And Bernstein, he identified figures like C.L. Sulzberger from the New York Times, Joseph Alsop, and Stuart Alsop from Newsweek, having a deep CIA ties through the 1960s, the late 1960s, that is. They performed tasks like disseminating agency viewpoints or gathering intel abroad, often for national service rather than cash. CIA files show that CBS had William Paley maintained a cooperative relationship into the 1970s, allowing agency input on coverage during the 1960s. The Khrushchev UN visit, CBS even permitted the CIA operative in its booth to lip read private talks. Yeah, how shady is that? So, former CIA director William Colby admitted to the House Intelligence Committee that post 1963, the agency used unaccredited media personnel like photographers and freelancers abroad as fair game for employment, and new rules by 1977 required news outlets' consent, but loopholes still persisted. The 1972 Watergate scandal, while not CIA driven, intensified media government tensions. Journalists, emboldened by adversarial reporting, began probing intelligence ties more aggressively. And this set the stage for Bernstein's 1977 bombshell, alleging over 400 journalists had CIA assignments since the 1950s, with many active into the 1970s. Though less detailed, the CIA sources confirmed some post-stringers were agency employees into the 1960s and the 70s, and publisher Catherine Graham was reportedly unaware, but Phil Graham's earlier role pre-1963 ended all cast a long shadow. So the CIA funded news service, active into the 1970s, supplied stories to 30 U.S. papers, including the Washington Post. And the agency scrambled to ensure only legitimate content reached domestic audiences, highlighting the tightrope of influence versus exposure. And the CIA saw the media as a counterweight to Soviet propaganda, justifying ties as national security imperatives in Vietnam and debates amplified this need. But by the mid 1970s, exposures like Rampart's and Bernstein's report cratered media credibility. A 1976 Gallup poll showed trust in newspapers dropping from 39% in 1973 to 20% by 1976, partly due to perceived CIA collusion. Now, the establishment narrative, when the CIA as a benign partner crumbles under scrutiny, the agency didn't just inform its shaped narratives, often illegally, like domestic influence violated its charter, yet evidence suggested a decline in formal ties by the late 1970s, driven by oversight by the Church Committee reforms and media wariness. Still, the lack of transparency, redacted files, uncooperative outlets leaves room for speculation about the extent of post 1970s influence. Now, since we've already established the distinction between the confirmed project and the alleged operation of Mockingbird, the broader media manipulative narrative, we will now take a deeper dive into the latter, the supposed large scale CIA program to infiltrate and influence American media, which we are still seeing today. This concept, while lacking a definitive paper trail under that name, is rooted in real CIA media ties and has grown into persistent theory. Now let's explore its origins, evidence, evolution, and modern interpretations, building on what we've covered already. The term Operation Mockingbird emerged in Deborah Davis's 1979 biography, Catherine the Great, Catherine Graham and Her Washington Post Empire. Now, Davis claimed it was a CIA initiative launched in the early 1950s under Frank Wisner, who was head of the Office of Policy Coordination, or OPC, to manipulate U.S. media for Cold War propaganda. She alleged that Wisner recruited Philip Graham, then who was the publisher of the Washington Post, as a key figure alongside a network of journalists and editors across major outlets. Now, Wisner's vision, that was known for calling his propaganda apparatus the mighty Wurlitzer, Wisner aimed to counter Soviet influence globally, and the OPC merged into the CIA by 1951. He did fund outlets like the Radio Free Europe and cultural fronts like Congress for Cultural Freedom. Davis framed Mockingbird as the domestic media arm of this effort. Now, Graham's role, Davis asserted Graham brokered deals with editors to plant CIA-friendly stories, leveraging his social ties in Washington elite circles. His 1963 End It All, okay, amid mental health struggles, adds a layer of intrigue, though no CIA documents confirm her claims. Now, what's real versus what is alleged? Unlike Project, with its declassified logs, the Operation Mockingbird lacks unified CIA cryptonym or official acknowledgement. However, fragments of evidence from investigations and admissions lend its partial credibility. The Church Committee from 1975 to 1976, the Senate's Church Committee uncovered CIA ties with about 50 U.S. journalists by the mid 70s. Some paid, others cooperative assets. Now, these relationships dated back to the 50s, aligning with Davis's timeline. And the committee noted that the CIA influence over news content, but stopped short of naming a program called Mockingbird. So here are some examples. Joseph Alsop, okay, from the New York Times, a vocal anti-communist, was flagged as a writing collaborator. The committee also cited CIA funding of magazines like Encounter, which indirectly shaped U.S. discourse. Carl Bernstein's 1977 expose. In his Rolling Stone article, The CIA and the Media, he claimed over 400 journalists had worked with the CIA since the 50s, far exceeding the Church Committee's count. He named outlets like the New York Times, CBS, Time, Newsweek, alleging formalized arrangements persisted into the 70s. Bernstein also pointed to NYT publisher author Hayes Sulzberger agreeing not to send reporters to certain countries at CIA's request, and CBS head William Paley offering agency access to footage. He suggested a Mockingbird-like operation, but didn't use the term explicitly. As for declassified records, the CIA's funding of the National Student Association exposed by Ramparts, including media outreach components, a declassified memo shows that the agency scrambled to manage press fallout, hinting at a broader influence network. Now, the CIA backed news evidence active into the 1970s. It's called Forum World Features. It supplied content to dozens of U.S. papers. Its existence supports claims of systematic media manipulation, though it is not labeled as Mockingbird. So the CIA cryptonyms like MK Ultra or even Chaos, okay, I covered Chaos the other day, they are well documented. But as for Mockingbird, it's not amongst them. Historians like David P. Hadley argued that Davis coined it, projecting a cohesive program into disparate efforts, if you will. Now, Davis's reliability, her book lacks citations, and her claim of a CIA lawsuit forcing edits, which was later denied, muddies her credibility. Critics like Edward J. Epstein sees it as speculative embellishment. Now, assuming that Mockingbird reflects real CIA media ties, here's how it may have unfolded. Wisner's OPC seeds the ground, funding fronts and cultivating journalists during McCarthyism's peak. Outlets like the Washington Post and Time amplify anti-Soviet narratives, often unwittingly via planted sources. Ties deepen amid Vietnam and the JFK assassination coverage. The CIA uses assets to counter conspiracy theories, like the 1967 memo on the Warren Commission critics, and bolster war support. Project Mockingbird could be tactical offshoot surveillance to plug leaks, threatening the broader effort. Now, in the 1970s, the exposure of Ramparts, the Church Committee, forces a retreat. CIA Director George H.W. Bush in 1976 pledged to end paid journalist relationships, though non-compensated ties still continued. Now, the modern interpretations as of today, the Operation Mockingbird narratives has morphed into a catch-all for government media collusion fueled by distrust and amplified online. The scholarly view, recent analyses, a 2023 Journal of Intelligence History piece acknowledged CIA media ties, but framed them as ad hoc, not a singular Mockingbird program. Catherine Olmsted's challenging the secret government in 2021 sees it as a Cold War relic, curtailed by the 1970s reform. As for pop culture, the books like Tom Secker's National Security Cinema in 2022 extend the idea to Hollywood, citing CIA script influence like Zero Dark 30. Though this diverges from the original journalism focus. Now, as for a reality check, post-1970s decline, CIA rules that since 1977, the bar paid journalist ties into FOIA releases shows no active Mockingbird equivalent. Informal influence like briefings persist, but nothing matches the alleged scale. Now, modern parallels. Okay, let's talk about Prism, the 2013 Snowdom leaks. Okay, and FBI social media pressure 2020, the Twitter files. Okay, it suggests that government sway over narratives, but these are distinct from centralized CIA media program. So, what does all this mean? Well, Operation Mockingbird is a less proven operation than a symbol of real but fragmented CIA media entanglements. Its staying power lies in documented history. 50 plus journalists, funded fronts, blown up into a grand conspiracy by gaps of transparency. By the 1970s, exposure and oversight likely dismantled by formal structure. If it existed, though its distrust, it sowed indoors. Now let's dive into the government, into how the government might still be manipulating traditional media, social media platforms today, building on historical precedents like the CIA media ties that we've already discussed, like the project and the alleged operation. I'll approach this with a mix of documented evidence, recent developments, and the critical analyses, while staying grounded in what is verifiable up until today. Since direct evidence is ongoing, systematic programs is often scarce or is classified. And I'll also explore patterns, incentives, and plausible mechanisms with a skeptical eye on both narratives and conspiracy claims. Okay. Traditional media manipulation, like government influence in 2025. The government's ability to shape traditional media, like newspaper, TV, radio, has roots in Cold War tactics, but persists in subtler modern forms. Here's how it's likely happening today. Mechanisms of influence. Embedded relationships. Historical CIA ties with journalists, the Church Committee, the 50 plus confirmed assets suggests a legacy of informal networks. Today, this might not require paid agents, but rather cooperative editors or reporters at outlets like the New York Times or CNN. Government officials like briefings, leaks can steer narratives without overt coercion. For instance, a 2023 Interceptor report revealed the Pentagon officials regularly meet with network executives to align defense coverage, a practice echoing 1960 tactics. Now, PR and press release. Agencies like the Department of Defense or the State Department flood media with curated press releases. A 2024 study by the Columbia Journalism Review found that 60% of national security stories in major U.S. outlets relied heavily on government sources, often uncritically. This is not manipulation in a cloak and dagger sense, but a structural bias toward official framing, like amplifying Iran threats, downplaying domestic surveillance. Now, when it comes to funding and incentives, public media like NPR, PBS, they receive federal grants. Like I think it was $465 million for the Cooperative of Public Broadcasting in 2024. While not direct editorial control, this creates pressure to avoid antagonizing priorities. Similarly, private outlets chasing excess. White House press pool may self-censor to maintain favor. Now, here are some recent examples when it comes to Mr. 19 narratives. In 2021, the FOIA request uncovered CDC emails urging the Washington Post and the New York Times to downplay lab leak theories, framing them as a fringe despite nearly early evidence rather. By 2023, when the theory gained traction, initial suppression hinted at coordinated influence. Not a Mockingbird program, but a softer push. When it came to the big U, the war, okay? Now, since 2022, U.S. outlets have closely mirrored State Department talking points, often sidelining dissent, calls for negotiation, right? A 2024 analysis by independent journalists found that 70% of CNN and NBC segments cited unnamed senior officials, suggesting a pipeline from government to newsroom. Now, here's a critical take for you. These establishment claims that it's just public affairs and not manipulation, but the line blurs when access journalism, where scoops depend on pleasing sources, creates a feedback loop. Not a smoking gun. Operation Mockingbird 2.0. It exists in declassified form, but the incentives, they align. Governments need compliant media to manage crises, and outlets need exclusives to survive. The result? A press that's less puppet than partner. Social media manipulation is the government digital reach. Social media platforms, X, Facebook, YouTube, offer governments unprecedented tools to shape discourse. But overtly and covertly, here's how they're likely involved in 2025. Mechanisms of influence, direct requests. The 2022 Twitter files exposed FBI and DHS flagging posts for removal. Over 3,000 instances in 2020 alone, often election-related. By 2023, a Fifth Circuit ruling curbed this, but loopholes remained. Agencies can advise without coercing. Twitter post in 2025 suggests that the CISA still flags misinformation like border security stats, with platforms quietly complying. Even though there is truth behind every single one of them, they're still going to flag them, remove them, and your account gets deleted. Right on? You know what happened to me. So, partnerships with these platforms, the Election Integrity Partnership, or EIP, a 2020 consortium with Stanford and DHS ties, flagged 22 million tweets for moderation. Now, while disbanded, similar efforts persist, like the 2024 DHS pilot with Meta to counter disinformation or on immigration. Platforms gain legal goodwill and governments gain their reach. Now, the proxy influence. Governments fund NGOs or contractors to push the narratives. In 2023, Disinformation Chronicle report found State Departments grant to groups like the Global Disinformation Index, which then pressure platforms to demonetize unreliable sites, often conservative or anti-establishment ones. So both networks and amplification, while the Russia and the China lead into state bots, state-run bots, that is. The U.S. is not above it. In 2022, Stanford study uncovered Pentagon-like linked accounts on Twitter promoting pro-U.S. messages in the Middle East. Hundreds of these bots, some active into 2024, per X Twitter posts tracking their handles. Now, here are some recent examples. The 2024 election cycle. Okay, Twitter X users in late 2024 claimed that the FBI pressure led YouTube to throttle channels questioning election integrity, citing hate speech policies. No hard proof emerged. But YouTube's algorithm shifts, favoring authoritative sources like CNN over independence, aligning with DHS priorities. Censorship via proxy. In 2023, the UK's Counter Disinformation Unit, now that is defunct, worked with X and Facebook to suppress Mr. 19 skeptic posts. A March 20th, 2025 Twitter post referenced explosive documents tying U.S. aid and the Global Engagement Center to similar U.S. efforts, unverified but plausible given past patterns. Now let's talk about AI and deep fakes. A 2024 RAND report warned of government interest and AI driven influence, okay? Like the China's rumored use of LLMs, okay, to mimic U.S. voters on X or Twitter. The U.S. denies this, but DARPA's 2023 AI research grant suggests exploration, if not deployment. Now, platform specific dynamics. When it comes to Twitter or X, they resist overt government pressure more than the pre 2022 Twitter, but subtle influence like ad revenue threats persists. Twitter openness amplifies counter narratives, making it harder to control, hence the government focus on other platforms. When it comes to Facebook, or Meta, that is now known as, their 2024 transparency report admitted removing 1.2 million posts at a government request, mostly tourism or public safety related. Critics on X argue that this includes political dissent, like pro-Palestinian content flagged by U.S. allies. Now, when it comes to YouTube, Google ties to NSA via data sharing history and its trusted source algorithm tilt content toward government aligned voices. A 2025 X thread noted YouTube demonetizing channels critical of NATO, hinting at indirect pressure. Now, the critical take with this: platforms claim that they're just enforcing terms of service, not bending to government will. Yet their reliance on ad revenue and regulatory favor, like avoiding antitrust, creates leverage points. The government does not need a formal Mockingbird when it can nudge via policy, funding, or backdoor chats, especially as AI amplifies reach and deniability, overlaps, and differences, traditional versus social. Well, traditional media manipulation leans on elite access and editorial gatekeepers. Social media involves a broader algorithmic control and user manipulation or amplification, really. Both, honestly. Both serve narrative alignment, hyping China threats, but social media scales and speed outpace print or TV. Traditional influence hides in source bias, social media in botnets and shadow bans. X posts often catch the latter faster. Sudden reach drops, while traditional skews go unnoticed unless dissected by watchdogs. Why does it still persist? Well, national security. Governments justify influence as countering adversaries, Russia, China. The 2024 ODNI threat assessment flagged foreign disinformation as a top risk, greenlighting domestic defensive measures. Public compliance, the crises, pandemics, wars demand unified messaging. A 2023 Pew survey found that 55% of Americans still trust government media collaboration on public health despite erosion elsewhere. Tech dependence, platforms, and media need government contracts or leniency. The meta of the $1.2 billion in federal deals since 2020 per Open Secrets. And the skeptical lens, the establishment insists that this is above board. PR, not propaganda, but opacity fuels doubt. Why redact the CISA's 2024 flagging logs? Why do ex-users keep spotting bot swarms after official denials? Conversely, conspiracy claims Mockingbird never ended, overreach without hard proof. The truth sits in this messy middle. Not a grand cabal, but a web of incentives, bending discourse toward power. Yeah. It's messy. It's a hot mess. It really truly is. But does it exist? Does it not exist? Is it still ongoing? Yes. I believe it is. All right. I'm out of here. I'll see you guys in the next one, okay? You stay safe, you stay positive, you keep prepping, and as always, fearless.